So Jutta, what is Polkadot and how does it work?
What is Polkadot? So I guess that's evolved over the last couple of years quite a bit. I mean, initially it started recognizing the problem that we need interoperability, but these days we see it as a very general framework for people to build blockchains that suit their particular needs, that make it easy to address the issues of governance and decentralized protocols. That's how we see it, but it's evolving. I mean, it's still in a research and R&D phase, and I'm really excited to see over the next couple of years how we can integrate and evolve it to make it easy for people to have, like, in particular, a scalable platform to build dApps.
And it's still really early. So what are some of the technical challenges you're addressing in the early stages here, very low in the stack?
So one of the challenges we're addressing with this is to, as I said, like, to come up with a scalable frameworks. Like, at the moment, we've seen, like, especially last year with, like, all the ICOs happening, how much of a challenge it is for a network like Ethereum to host all these applications, and that's one thing we're addressing. As a general framework, I'm really excited about our recent work on a technology called Substrate, which is really the core of Polkadot, but it goes beyond that. So it's a very abstract framework, a state machine, and I see it as the next stage of how we are looking at blockchain and what it can do. So, like, in the very early phase, we had Bitcoin, which provided this, like, payment platform, if you want to look at it like this. Then with Ethereum, there came this idea of having this platform for building decentralized applications, and now we're pushing it to the next stage, so sort of providing, like, a very general framework for developing your own blockchain, your own decentralized system in that context.
And you've described this as blockchain 3.0, and you've also described Polkadot as having the first live testnet for blockchain 3.0. So why is that significant?
So to us, it's significant just to see that this concept, I mean, that what we thought we wanted to build is actually working. So we came up with a testnet for Substrate. So and being able to test a lot of assumptions. So going forward, like, Polkadot will, for example, have a proof of stake network, overcoming all the issues with proof of work that we know, and while you can like, research a lot of things on paper, also a lot of testing needs to happen to find out the right parameters and whatnot. So that's one thing where we also want to get people over time involved, helping fine-tune what we're building.
And you've designed this using arbitrary message passing via relay chains instead of something like atomic swap. So why design it that way?
So what we tried to do was basically come up with the most general framework, like, why there are different reasons why you might want to, why you need interoperability. I mean, it would just be nice to be able to, like, transact without the need for centralized exchange between Ethereum and Bitcoin, for example. There are other things you might want to do. Like, in the end, we all think of this really seamless network of blockchains where every dApp can talk to every dApp, and where it doesn't really matter. Like, you don't have to pick and choose which network you want to use, but you just think of, like, your business problem, and maybe there's, like, an insurance app that needs to trigger, like, the payout and whatnot, and this should all happen seamlessly, and for this you need more than just the ability to transact tokens. You need arbitrary transactions to happen between those chains.
And what does the power of that look like in the future? So if we design so that we're using arbitrary message passing instead of the limitations you're describing of atomic swaps, what could that realize for us in the future of many blockchains as you see it?
So really, to become, like, this like, that we at some point come to this stage where where users are much more in control of their data. I mean, that's to me the long-term dream, really, that this all becomes part of the stack for the future decentralized web, what we started to call Web 3. That's to me like the long-term goal, where we have strong encryption for messaging between people, and blockchain is this layer that manages expectations between participants without us having to rely on the centralized service providers. So, I mean, I guess like especially the last few months with the revelations around Facebook and whatnot have shown how tricky it is if we can't look through what's happening on the servers that we all rely on, but we have to just believe and trust what the service provider tells us in the T's and C's if they do.
Yeah.
And that's really, to me, where I would see this all like to go and become powerful.
And so how do you design state machines for not only the past right now, for the blockchains that we've already seen, but also the present and the future?
So I think one challenge that this industry will see is to find a good trade-off between innovating and tailoring to what we think we need, but at the same time also integrating legacy systems, or like the way how we currently design apps and what's existing on the web right now. So I was part of the team that built Ethereum, and while at the time it was completely sensible to build like a custom-made virtual machine for Ethereum because it was way easier to integrate and whatnot, like there's a case to be made that like actually what you want is something that is much more easy to interact with systems we have right now. And one thing we're pushing for example, is the use of WebAssembly in that context, because it's a standard that people seem to agree right now, like that will be directly available readily in browsers, and so we think it makes completely sense to make use of these things. It comes with way more tooling. It will make the coding of smart contracts hopefully much more secure, because it has all the tooling around it, than trying to come up with like all your like customized systems where in the end you don't have enough eyes on the code and on the systems.
And we're all concerned about security in the space. Are audits one way to address this? Are you using audits yourself?
I guess, I mean, I've seen a lot of different issues arising. I mean, most recently, I guess, like we've had several issues last year, which we learned from a lot. I mean, which again informed like our thinking around we need to come to standards, like that's one thing, but then also just in general establish the right processes. Like having several implementations, for example, was one thing that we pushed for when we built Ethereum, to have this, to adopt like a principle that's very common in aircraft, for example, software programming there. I don't know, like audits to me, I think it's helpful to have external people reviewed, and that's one thing, one key element in these processes. But the term audit, to me, sometimes creates a bit of a maybe too strong sense of like this is now an approved piece of code, but it's in the end just something that people looked at, and really we need more tools and like a whole range of processes that address this.
And would an audit have prevented the lockup of funds that you experienced as the challenge we were referencing last year?
It's hard to say. I mean, maybe somebody might have found it, but like I've heard other people that also are very deep in the business of developing smart contracts that said like the fact that this particular issue that we had in November, they found a lot of issues in their code themselves, and they develop like on a day-to-day basis smart contracts. So it's hard. I mean, it's all moving, and again, like this brings me to the conclusion. Basically, what we need is more standardized tools, and borrowing a lot more from what exists already.
And can we expect these funds to be released in the near future, or is this still a long-term savings account?
There are a lot of discussions happening at the moment around this. So it has highlighted the fact that what we really haven't solved so far with decentralized systems is how we address governance in general, like the way how you would eventually fix the issue of locked funds is through a hard fork, or like through some change in the protocol that could release it. Like you can't do it on the application layer, you have to do it on the lower level. And we haven't really found out, or we haven't really found a good answer to how we do governance, in particular to how we glue on governance retroactively, which is one of the things, again, that we try to solve, or at least provide for with Polkadot and Substrate in the first place, like a mechanism for how to do changes to the protocol on-chain, that it doesn't have to be like this discrete, really hard event where it's hard to get everybody on board. But I'm really excited and by all the discussions that are happening right now, just in general about governance. Like there's the Ethereum Magicians initiative, for example, or also the workshop that happened in Toronto around AdCon. So finding all these different ways for how we can get a sense of what the community wants, what the different stakeholders want. And I think that's essential. And I also hope, we've seen a lot of really contentious arguments, I guess, online. When I speak to people in real life, I don't get the feeling that it's, although people have different opinions, but it's a much more constructive debate. And maybe there's a way that we even find better mechanisms in general, how we can improve online debates. The fact that Reddit and Twitter are often such a mess, that's not helpful. It's not helpful in politics either. And I just hope that this whole issue around governance will help us to find better mechanisms how we interact online as well.
And should we be concerned about pooling security in the way that it's set up with Polkadot? Or why is that equally secure to other consensus mechanisms?
So one thing that we think will also be a problem for blockchains going forward is if you want to launch your own chain, it's one thing that you have to address is you have to think about how you deal with security, how you find miners and whatnot. So we believe it completely makes sense to pool wherever you can pool, and so using a joint framework, what Polkadot provides to have all these chains co-secured makes sense from that perspective, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time.
And can that slow everything down?
We hope it will actually lead to by doing it the right way, that it will actually then address scalability, and in that way lead to actually an increase in transaction volume in particular. You have to do it on the right levels, do the hierarchies in the right way, but that's how we think about it.
And what is?
There's also then in the end, what we probably see is again a relay chain of relay chains, and this is just a general way how mathematically you would look into abstracting and scaling things out. But there are initiatives happening on all sorts of levels, right? You have scalability initiatives on the application layer, which will help for certain circumstances, but we believe there's a fundamental need on the lower level that makes it easy to come up with all these adaptable chains.
And you're a mathematician by training, so what is the right way to create this?
I'm not sure there is, in that sense, a right way. I believe it is just a lot of need for innovation on all sorts of levels, but we believe that this is where we can do the most at this stage. So really you want to combine it and you want to make sure that all these things are compatible.
And so right now you're focusing very low in the stack. Does it really make sense for people to be focusing on dApps at this point, or is it way, way too early?
I do think it makes sense to look into dApps. In the end, that informs what we need. Without the issues that we've seen, or without people trying to push, I think that the debate, for example, around governance would have been very different 2 years ago, before the DAO and before what else happened. But then, we're not just solely focusing on innovating on layer 0, layer 1. There's also work we are doing at the moment around light client and light wallets. So it will be interesting to see where the trade-offs are going to be, how centralized or decentralized systems will be. Coinbase has had a lot of attention, but it's in the end a centralized endpoint. And will it be possible to how far will it be possible to push like decentralization to the edges? Like, how do we solve user experience? How do we solve the issue that like syncing with a node is too heavy, takes too long? Like, and one approach that we are trying to explore is around light client and light wallet. So, and we hope that people will pick this up and experiment themselves, like how to use light clients in that setting.
And how can we be so sure there won't be one blockchain in the future that rules them all?
I think we've just seen, like, over the last few years that there's a lot of, like, there are so many different business needs. Like, you need different systems for different applications, and really, like, having different chain is one way of solving the scalability issue. So that's why I think this whole narrative, like, around there will be one chain that rules them all, is a bit not so constructive. Yeah.
And so if we accept this vision of the future where there's going to be many different blockchains, what is the problem with them using centralized services?
So it brings us back to, there might be like at some point there's like efficiency gain sometimes when you have centralized systems, but really in principle you want to have the freedom to have it all decentral, and then you can add on or consolidate certain things where it makes sense to have them more centralized. But in the end, like having like this decentralized layer is the basis for competition, for like for having this platform where it's easy to build and offer your services in different places, and they can all easily interact with each other. Like, it's probably not likely that like everything will be decentral, but it's a prerequisite for then building safer and more secure systems where certain things are consolidated and offered like in one place.
Is it limiting to network effects in some way if we continue to just have several blockchains using centralized services?
I don't know whether it's limiting. I mean, like, it's hard to tell. Like, but I think it's important to just question like where do we need centralization really, and aren't there other mechanisms that or other technologies that we can use in order to break these things up and not having to rely on the centralized solutions?
And what does the future look like? How far away is it that we're going to have, decentralization in the way you envision it being possible that you think we missed out on with the internet we have today?
So I guess, for ourselves, like for Polkadot, I hope that we can stick to our development timeline, like have launched at the end of 2019 for that system, and then really, I think it will be in stages. Like, we'll see certain technologies that will be used earlier on. We've experimented with also, and that's another thing I'm excited about, like seeing how blockchain then combined with other cryptographic technologies can lead to better systems. So one project we've been working on is a decentral data store, and that's really something that could be independently used, almost right now. Will be much more powerful if there's an underlying scalable blockchain. And so I think we are going to see it in stages, and probably it's more like these systems that we'll first see being used potentially more like in B2B settings where it's essential to comply with certain regulatory requirements.
Great. And then in terms of your ICO, you structured it in such a way so that there's a 2-year lockup on trading your tokens. Does that mean, 2 years from the sale, we can expect a product in the market that everyone can use, or did you structure it that way for another reason?
So I think it's, I think with the ICOs, like we're really just learning what is a good approach here. Like, where does it make sense? I think Ethereum had an interesting and sensible mechanism in the way that the token was only tradable once the network was live. But yeah, lockups are one way. You want to incentivize the teams long term, and I think it completely makes sense. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how projects find their answers to the challenges. Like, we're seeing more and more this year that projects rather refer to initially traditional ways of financing until they really have something that they can present.
And so now we can already see what you have.
Yeah.
And it's open source, and we can go see it.
Yeah.
Where?
So, I mean, come to GitHub, come to our Riot channels. That's where we talk about it, where you can ask questions. Twitter, we have our all the channels, but it's all on GitHub basically. Yeah.
Wonderful. So check out Polkadot on GitHub. Thank you so much.